Wanted to do some more multiplying problems from section 1.4 on Algebra 2 just because we did one at the end of class, but I just felt like that I wasn't getting vibes from you guys that things were going real well with your understanding. If I want to multiply, look on 32, 3x minus 10 times 3x minus 10. By the way, they could have written that problem as 3x minus 10 squared. If they had, you would have had to first write it out the way they wrote it here, because those two things mean the same thing. You need to know that because that's, if you looked at 33 and 34, they are actually making you write them out yourself. So actually the answer for 32 and the answer for 34 are going to be the same thing, aren't they? Because they're the same problem. Okay. Now, what you have to remember when you're multiplying this stuff out is that you kind of look at the parentheses that I'm writing in red is the thing that's going to stay put, kind of. And then first I'm going to multiply everything in that red parentheses times 3x and get my answers for that. And then I'm going to come over and multiply everything in the red parentheses times a negative 10. We're distributing here, and they sometimes call that FOIL. FOIL only works when you have two terms in each parentheses. It won't work if they were to add a term in on either one of them. So I don't like to teach that way. I want to teach you a way that will work all the time. So let's look first at how we're going to do this. I'm going to leave this second 3x minus 10 alone, and I'm going to say 3x times 3x would give me 3 times 3 is 9, x times x is x squared. Now I multiply it by the first term in the red parentheses. Now I got to multiply it by the next term in the red parentheses. 3x times negative 10. Okay, so 3 times negative 10 is negative 30, but then there's an x that gets smushed in with it too, right? All right, so I've multiplied both things by 3x. Now I got to take this negative 10 and multiply both things over in the parentheses by it. Now, one thing I always kind of like to do, a lot of teachers go above it like this. Negative 10 times 3x is negative 30x. One thing I do sometimes to keep it from getting so cluttered is to go underneath. So negative 10 times 3x is negative 30x. And negative 10 times negative 10. A negative times a negative is a positive. And then you got a 10 times 10 is 100. FOIL, they would have said the 3x times 3x, that was the 9x squared, were the first two terms multiplied together. I did not teach it that way in Algebra 1 because I just tend to not like that so much. That's how I learned, and I always thought FOIL was some magical way of getting everything, and it's just distributing is all it is. The O would be the two outside terms in FOIL, 3x times negative 10, which would have given you the negative 30x, one of them. The two inside terms with FOIL would have been these two terms. Negative 10 times 3x would have given you another negative 30x. And then if you were using that acronym FOIL, you would say the two last terms in each parentheses, negative 10 times negative 10 is plus 100. Regardless, you have the same results in this problem. Now, we've got to combine like terms and clean this up. You can never leave this stuff like this or it won't be counted correct. When we're combining like terms, you have to have the same variable and the same exponent. So this x squared term cannot be combined with anything else because even though there are other terms that have x's on it, this one has a squared and those other two x's don't. So 9x squared is going to have to be by itself. It cannot be put together with anything else. Now these two terms are like terms. They both have x's. And there's the invisible 1 exponent on them, so the variable matches and the exponent matches. So I'm going to add them together. Negative 30x minus 30x is negative 60x. And if you are still having problems with your negatives, use your calculator, but really try to get this down. This is something that's going to hold you back the rest of math if you can't say negative 30 and negative 30 make negative 60 when you're combining. Now I can't combine that 60x with this 9x squared because this 9x squared's got a square on it as an exponent, and this one's got the invisible 1. 100 I can't combine with anything else because it's just my constant term. I can't smush it together with anything else. So I end up with this as my answer. The answer for 34 would be the same thing because when they tell you 3x minus 10 squared, what you're going to have to do to work it is say that's 2 copies of 3x minus 10. And then you're going to notice it's the same problem, and you're going to end up with the same answer. A lot of people would think the answer to this was 9x squared minus 100, but do you notice if you think that, you're missing that middle term. You can't just square both of those terms and plop them out. These are the same problem. Okay, do one more. Let's do one where they don't match up. Let me do number 30, where they're not exactly two of the same thing, in other words. So number 30. 4x minus 3 times 7x minus 5. Okay, so if you remember the second parentheses, we look at it as that's the parentheses we're distributing over. For instance, if I had 4x, If I just had this, you would have known you had to say this times this and this times this. And that's really what's going on here. I'm looking at it as 4x is in front of that parentheses, and minus 3 or negative 3 is in front of those parentheses. Okay, so 4x times 7x. 4 times 7 is 28, and x times x is x squared. I'm going to use a different color for each step of this just so that helps a little bit. 4x times negative 5. 4 times negative 5 is negative 20, and then I put the x on it because it's also multiplied in. Do you remember when we have numbers and variables and we multiply, we just kind of smush the number and the variable together to show they're multiplied. All right, now I'm down to this negative 3 here. I got to distribute it over 7x minus 5. It's like I'm thinking this that I just wrote down here in black. Negative 3 times 7x, negative 3 times 7 is negative 21, and I smush the x in to show that it's multiplied. And I'll pick a purple here. Negative 3 times a negative 5, a negative times a negative is a positive, and 3 times 5 is 15. All right, if I'm trying to simplify this, I want to get all the like terms together. The terms that are always alike usually come out in the middle here anyway. They're almost always there. Look at those. Those are both x's with no exponents on it, or they're x's with the invisible 1 exponents on it. So those are the two I got to put together. Negative 20x and negative 21x would be negative 41x. Oops, that doesn't look good, so let me come down here. I don't like that it connected. Okay, then I've got this 28x squared here. I cannot squish that together with that x term because they have to have the same exponent on them. Again, you're supposed to remember this from Algebra 1. This is not supposed to be me teaching it for the first time. It's just kind of helping you, remember that you've done this before. You've got a constant of plus 15 here on the end. Here is your answer.